أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسوله الكريم. My brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Once again, welcome to Different Perspectives. You know, we try to give different perspectives on everything that we deal with because, of course, in life, there are more than one perspective to every different thing that we deal with. And I start with the normal reminder that verily Allah will never change the condition of a people until they change it themselves. O you who believe, if you help the cause of Allah, He will help you and plant your feet firmly. And thirdly, and Allah will surely support those who support Him. Indeed, Allah is powerful and exalted in might. For the last 3 programs, we have been dealing with the question of leadership and governance in Islam. And you know, this week, no, it was last week, I got an email with the subject matter being, why are men stupid? Or why are men so stupid? And in going into the details of the email, what they were saying is that they were pointing out that over the last year or so, they were indicating that the amount of men in leadership positions across the world, and of some of the highest positions in the structure of the world, both in economics, politics, business, they have made a fool of themselves by getting involved in things like extramarital affairs and being caught. We had the situation, in fact, this week, I think, the case against what's this guy, John, who went up for the president, was contender for the president 4 years ago. I can't remember his second name. And he, as in the U.S., and he had cheated on his wife while he was running for the presidential nominee. And he wasn't brought up because of the fact that he committed adultery. It was because he used campaign finance to cover it up. We had the situation with the IMF leader from France, who was the lead contender for the presidential election that is now taking place in France. And he was also, he was caught or alleged that he had tried to rape a maid in a hotel. And there are numerous instances like that. And if it's not with illicit affairs with women, it was about greed and money. So we find that leadership positions are sought by people and who have some level of character faults. And therefore today we are looking at the question of leadership characteristics and principles. And once again, I have with my brother Fahim, who would be joining us. Brother Fahim, Assalamu alaikum and welcome. Once again, I know you took a rest last week, but we still had a good program.
Definitely.
So, in terms of, as I said, the question of these characteristics of a leader is such an important thing.
It is.
Because it shows up, that shortcoming shows up in different ways. When one becomes into a leadership position, he doesn't become a leader. He attains leadership position, but shows his faults and shortcomings.
That's right. And I think it's really a question that the position brings out what is there. It's not so much that they aspire to be the leader and so on, and that corrupts them as much as this is who they were, or they
That's
had
right.
that propensity to do that. So it's pretty interesting. I think what makes it even more profound is the propensity of people, the seeming preference of people to romanticize those persons in positions of authority. We call them leaders, whether they are able and willing to lead or not, but we refer to them as leaders, and then we put them on this pedestal almost, only to be horribly surprised and so disappointed and repulsed when instances like this show up.
And to the extent that, as I pointed out, I think John Christopher is Christopher.
Yeah, I am blissfully unaware.
Yeah, so. But the fact is that, he wasn't pulled up for committing adultery, having an affair.
Right.
It was because he used campaign financing. So this has now become no big deal within the leadership sphere, right? To be immoral on both sides. And even with greed and immorality as far as financial shenanigans is concerned, that is sometimes not very, frowned upon the way it should. So we are quickly adapting to these kind of behavior, right, from leaders, because apparently it's become so prevalent that it's now accepted as part of a characteristic of a leader.
Well, and this is where it gets pretty interesting. What you have, and I'm drawing from leadership theory first, and then we'll look at the Islamic side of it. But from the leadership theory side of it, you don't get much ethical requirements or standards which the leaders have to obey or adhere to in their capacity as leadership. What you have a whole range of different characteristics that are espoused for different people. The approach is essentially descriptive. We would research 100, 500 of the top performing leaders and persons of influence in organizations or societies and so on. We would try to synthesize what they are doing and look for those common characteristics across the board. And here, then we would have a leadership model or leadership theory that would guide us in terms of, well, look, the people who are succeeding today are doing A, B, C, X, Y, Z, and therefore we need to be doing A, B, C, X, Y, Z in order to succeed at this time.
That's right.
Yeah, and you'll find over the decades that those theories tend to change with the times and keep pace with the times. So very interesting and different from an Islamic point of view, where it's not as much descriptive as it is prescriptive, as it is drawing from the guidance within the sources of knowledge in Islam, the Quran, the Hadith, the Sunnah, and so on, and trying to, based on that, articulate what a leader is, who a leader should be. And that's where you have a lot more emphasis on ethical codes that surface. Yeah, just to illustrate the differences there. Today we hear of those traits, if you will, those characteristics of a leader, and you would hear of things like intelligence, like energy, self-awareness, confidence, courage, and so on, and you would have a list of those things as it relates to Islam, and drawing from Sunnah, for example, we have one of the first characteristics of the Holy Prophet Muhammad, peace be on him, was that of honesty. He was known as the truthful one, even before he got revelation and he started to preach Islam and so on. Society knew him as one who was truthful, as one who was honest, as one who was trustworthy, and so on. And that's where you begin to see a disparity between leadership theory in terms of conventional wisdom today and leadership as it is envisioned and understood within an Islamic realm.
Well, basically they have a lot of the same characteristics, but what is added is the moral prescription.
That's right. That's right.
That is lacking on the other side.
That's right. And at the end of the day, it boils down to, well, in my interpretation, it boils down to a very simple set of areas that we need to look at in terms of assessing our leaders, in terms of aspiring to become leaders, whether that leader is serving in a position of formal authority in an organization, for example, or not, working at different levels throughout the organization or even outside. One of the first things is, of course, honesty, trust, and trustworthiness. And you find that where you are able to gain the trust of people, and they put their trust in you, that you would do whatever is necessary and pursue the courses of action and make the decisions and so on in their best interest. Or if it's not in their best interest, then at least it's for the long-term good of the whole. Where you're able to elicit that trust from people, you're well on your way to gaining that ability to influence others. Yeah? So that's one of the fundamental areas that it's almost a prerequisite, if you will. Yeah. One of the other ones, pretty simply, is that of respect and treating people with respect as equals in terms of human beings. Not being condescending, not being overly aggressive or assertive, and basically treating a human being as a human being, which is something unfortunately some people struggle with. Yeah, and they tend to talk down, or be abusive or whatever not. But those two elements would really represent some of the prerequisites for anyone who hopes to aspire or to become a leader. And I'm saying this from the Islamic viewpoint. It's also pretty well debated and adhered to or embraced within leadership theory. Yeah. So you have some of those qualities. Beyond that, you start to look at, and this is where it becomes different. Some research, for example, on what are the qualities of a leader, and are there any universal qualities of a leader? Out of the 1,000 different institutions, different researches that were assessed, there was 5% commonality. 95% of it was all over the place. So, I mean, in today's world, you have 7 billion people, you'd probably have 7.5 billion different interpretations of what qualities a leader must have, yeah? Generally, the more popular ones are things like intelligence, the ability to apply a framework or model to reality, to help interpreting and to help make sense of what we see. That seems to be one of the more popular ones. How successfully it's done is a different issue. You have, apart from intelligence, you have things like courage. Yeah, the ability to take a difficult decision and then follow through with it, standing firm to your beliefs, your values, your convictions that this is the right thing to do. Again, you have that being done to different degrees. You would, for example, see some people in positions of authority who may be extremely accommodating. It's almost as if they want everybody to like them. Yeah, so you really find this type of individual saying no, or being forceful and saying this is right, this is wrong, and so on. That's one category. And of course, you have persons who are the complete opposite, and they are making this decision. And I mean, if your feelings are hurt, or if you object or whatever, not, well, so be it. But this is what has to be done. And you have, of course, people between that entire spread. One of the more popular ones is energy. And I'm not speaking of any induced energy from courtesy one of our energy beverages or so on. But in terms of that drive, and you hear it interpreted in terms of things like motivation, drive, commitment, dedication, and so on. and it's a pretty popular one. The expectation is that the leader would be there to drive it. Yeah.
Energize that money.
Well, correct, correct. They have that drive and they have that motivation, and they're moving or they're working towards some goal, generally a long-term goal, yeah, as opposed to a shorter-term, opportunistic type goal or objective. So it's almost as if people want to see that so they could feed off of it. Yeah, that's one of the more popular traits. You have
not fair-minded.
Well, fair-minded is a pretty interesting one, and particularly when you're looking at leadership in a society, a group of groups, because here you would have leaders emerging who are committed to their particular groups.
Right.
And you may find a risk in the decisions that are made serving the interests of one group and not necessarily the collective. Yeah. I mean, and you will have different philosophical bases that inform these things. For example, in our reality today, we are heavily influenced by the philosophy of freedom, individual freedom.
Right.
Yeah. The individual should be free to pursue any course of action and model any types of reasonable behavior that they choose, and that should be fine, and we should be very accommodating of that. In the East, you have a great emphasis on equality, so that we need to consider, well, not so much equality, but selflessness, concern for individuals, commitment to the wider society, where our behaviors have to consider the effects or the impacts on others. And if something is going to have a negative impact, then we would think very long and very hard before we pursue that behavior, and in many respects we won't. You see that surfacing in many of the Eastern philosophy, Eastern religions and social behavior codes and so on. So you have differences in what the civilization emphasizes and differences in the results based on that. Certainly, if you look back at the quality of trust, once you as the leader have the trust of those who follow you, then the expectation is that you would be fair and balanced and measured in your approach to dealing with situations that affect the group. When you're talking about a leader of one group in an environment of many other groups and many other leaders, then that's where you'll have different sentiments surfacing on what exactly constitutes fairness or not. Yeah?
Because they would have other criteria playing a part in the whole process.
That's right, and people would, I mean, they would probably expect to see bias, or they would look for bias. Some people would see bias whether it's there or not, which is another discussion entirely. But you know, you have that sentiment that permeates. It's extremely difficult in contexts like that to convince people that this decision is in the best interest of the collective. And I think in some respects, if you look at the Islamic code, the entire Islamic ethical construct, what it seems to emphasize is a third approach, which is that of justice. Yes, you are free in some ways to behave and to pursue different courses of action, but you also have to consider, number one, the impacts on others, and number two, the consequences of those moving down. So the prohibition on anything that would endanger your life and so on and so forth. Yes, we should be free to smoke or to drink or whatever not, but if it's going to endanger our lives, here we have Islam saying, well, look, that is not in your best interest, whether you see it or not, and therefore you should not do it. Yeah.
I had an interesting in doing some research, so an interesting approach to this whole question of the qualities of an exemplary leader. It was done by Imam Zaid, and I would like you to comment on the approach. He started with a verse of the Quran. It's Surah 3, verse 159, and it goes, "Owing to the mercy from God, you were gentle in dealing with them, your companions. Were you harsh and crude, hard of heart, they would have fled from you. Therefore pardon their abuses, seek God's forgiveness for them, and consult them in their affairs. Once you have resolved on a course of action, be decisive, and trust in God. Surely God loves who trust Him." And he said this verse contains a wealth of instructions to guide those who are leaders, and as Muslims, we should all be leaders. And I want to go down the line how we broke it down,
Right.
and I want you to comment on how it relates to leadership.
Right.
He started with the first word, owing to the mercy from God. And he says, God is reminding his prophet, peace be upon him, that the mercy he displays, in fact, all of the virtues or favors that he enjoys are all from God. This is a critical point for any leader to realize, because of the propensity of those in positions of leadership to assume that they are in those positions because of something they have done. While it is certainly true that in many instances hard work and perseverance have assisted a particular individual in his or her rise to the top, even the possession of those qualities is due to God.
Right. Well, that is probably the best place to start when we're looking at leadership from an Islamic viewpoint. Yes, definitely, that is the prevailing sentiment. In fact, I think the Quran directly states that we have appointed some of you over others to look after their affairs and to do so justly and so on. So yes, there's that recognition in the sovereignty of God. It's a double-edged sword, though. In my estimation, you have on one part faith in a higher authority, and that produces some excellent results in terms of behavior, in terms of commitment, and so on. Here we are saying that, listen, my destiny is determined by a God who is all wise, all just, all knowing, and all merciful, and so on and so forth. And therefore, I need to keep doing what I'm doing, and He will guide me accordingly, and so on and so forth, right? Which gives people that sense of empowerment, that sense of commitment, as they work towards doing what they're doing. They know that, from a Muslim viewpoint, they know that, well, look, if I didn't see success in this, then it's probably for the best. And if I am seeing success, it's all thanks to God, and therefore I know that I've done my part, and He is granting me from His wisdom. Which, again, it does lead to some elements, some really constructive elements, in my opinion, things like humility, tempering that sense of achievement and that sense of accomplishment, and saying, hey, look, it's not just up to me. The danger with that is complacency, is saying, well, look, God says He would look after our affairs, and when bad things happen, boss, what are you doing? And look some prayers and help me out. And when is working in my favor, well, yeah, I'll give you an example.
No, you answer you think that's typical Muslim, because I was going on here. That is God going on in the Muslim community.
Well, yes.
We don't understand that God tells us to be the best.
Right, correct.
He said we are the best.
And aspire to be the best.
That's right.
Correct.
That's mean, and he gave us what? He gave us intellect.
Correct.
And we ought to be using our intellect that he gave us. He gave us knowledge.
But you see, here's the problem. And I think, again, is the Quran that draws this reference. Man plans and God is the best of planners.
Of course.
And I think in that context, you have some people who take the approach, well, look, God is the best of planners, so I ain't going to bother to plan. And we saw it in...
No, but you remember he said man plans.
Well...
And what it means, that man should plan.
Well, that they should or that they do is two different things. And again, I guess the tafsir of...
And I think the point you're making there is typically what we see within the Muslim community.
We do see it. We do see it.
I was telling somebody recently, I was just in Orlando a couple of weeks ago.
Okay.
And I visited the Kennedy Space Center. And they had an IMAX program on the Hubble.
With your beard and everything?
Yeah.
Okay.
And they had an IMAX that I went to see.
Right.
And the Space Hubble. This is, you know what? Why start there looking at this thing? And you know what struck me? That the Muslims were the one who pioneered this whole technology. And where are we now in respect of it? We have abandoned everything that we were the top of. All the sciences. And so that attitude.
Yeah.
That attitude, right, is evidence of why we are where we are. We have stopped trying to achieve. We have stopped being the best. We have stopped trying to be the best as Muslims. And the Quran tells us that we are the best.
I think I agree with you to a point.
But either side.
Right. No, but I agree with you to a point. I certainly see it in the leadership programs that we run for the Muslim community. People tend to take this hands-off approach. Look, whatever Allah wills, so be it.
So we don't have to do anything.
The trouble with that is this. When the Muslims conquered Persia, or was it Syria or something, and they were in the lowlands and it was pretty waterlogged and so on, and you had a plague affecting the Muslims. I think out of 300,000, 25,000 soldiers died and so on, which is a huge loss. And the people were there and they were praying and just continuing to pray. The head of the army died as a result of the plague, and the prayers continued, and the person who succeeded him died, and the prayers continued. And then one of the successors eventually said, hey, this is rubbish, we have to go to higher ground.
That's right.
Yeah? And they did, and the affliction stopped. Is good that we have that tradition to draw upon, because is particularly needed today when people seem to take this hands-off approach. Well, look, this thing is on autopilot, and God does, or He would orchestrate whatever is in the best interest. And yet He says we wouldn't change the condition of our people until they change, or they start to change. Yeah?
And there's a reason why I say that at the beginning of every program.
Right, correct.
So people understand that, listen, we have to do.
Right, and that one philosophy, which is pretty interesting, is a multi-million-dollar industry today. We know it as the law of attraction, and you have countless books and media available treating with that. The law of attraction, once you decide to pursue a particular path and you start moving down that path, the entire world colludes to help you along. And yes, you will see obstacles, and yes, you will see challenges and so on, but you will always find help, which is no different from Islam. When you try, you will benefit from sources you never imagined, and I think that's a reference in the Quran. So here you have the very same thing being espoused in both ideologies, or both theologies, and it's almost as if we forget that. Yeah.
Well, it is good that you brought that analogy up, because when you look at the Quran and the hadith of the Prophet, we would realize, unfortunately, there is only a theological approach taken to understanding that. But if you look at management theory, military theories, all different sciences, they emanate from the Quran. And all the contemporary theories that are coming up. And I think what we're going through here now, we would see that a lot of those theories are in Islamic jurisprudence already.
Right. Or were built
and
from
philosophy.
Or were built heavily from Islamic contributions.
So let me look at the other one.
Right.
And you were gentle in dealing with them, your companions. Gentleness does not exist in anything except that it beautifies it. And is not removed from anything except that it defiles it. In many instances, when we are in leadership positions, we try to impose our authority on others. In some instances, this only engenders stubborn rebellion and opposition. In some instances, it brings about grudging compliance. Neither situation is healthy. Gentleness, on the other hand, encourages willing compliance.
That is an extremely dangerous point, from my viewpoint. You were gentle in dealing with them. Yes, there is some expectation that a leader is compassionate or demonstrates empathy towards the followers, and that is across leadership theory. Yeah? However, in some
remember,
situations,
we have to look at the ayah, the whole.
Yeah.
But remember, we're taking just little pieces, and he's trying to identify different characteristics at each level.
Dissecting that entire thing into the different components. I hear you. But you see, the danger is this. Well, you have within Islam, on the plus side, you have the example of the Holy Prophet, peace be on him, who never raised his voice and was never angry at people and so on and so forth, or never demonstrated anger. You have the example in Surah Joseph of when Joseph was thrown down the well and later he became king and his brothers came to him. He could have exacted any kind of revenge, but he didn't. Yeah. So you have the Quran and Islam is replete with examples of that. And that it works, I think, has been pretty well established across the board. Islamic, Western, Eastern, whatever philosophy. The problem is this, and I've seen it in Trinidad, which is why I think is pretty important to mention. Different situations call for different leadership approaches. I have seen, experienced firsthand and seen also from a consultancy viewpoint, some people really try to be good leaders at the start of their tenure. When they are appointed to a position, they want to take a leadership approach to that position, and they really try. Things like humility, things like compassion, empathy, gentleness, in some instances have been seen as signs of weakness. People have trampled over individuals who were trying to be or epitomize this quality of gentleness. Yeah, they were seen as weak. They were seen as gullible, or they could be taken advantage of. And I mean, we have seen, for example, some of the best intentioned people become absolute brutes in order to achieve a particular goal, which is essentially throwing leadership out the window and adopting a different management approach, command and control, reward and punishment, or whatever. Because in some situations it may not work. So it's situational.
Remember when we looked at leadership, it is not a one or the next, or it's not dichotomous in the sense that it's not that you could only be gentle.
Correct.
Remember, there was consultation that we dealt with in a great deal.
That's right.
So it's how we combine these characteristics and utilize them based on your assessment of the need.
And exactly that. It has to be balanced.
Right.
It has to be tempered.
That's
it's
right.
not just, well, we take a gentle approach.
That's right.
However, when you talk in gentleness, I think the spirit of that, by my interpretation, is this whole issue of respect that we mentioned at the start. And whatever approach you're taking, you must never, or there's need to never forget or never lose sight of the fact that you're a human being, Hafiz,
That's
I'm a
right.
human being.
Because you
We
spoke
can't-
about condescending.
That's right.
So this gentleness
That's right.
is in respect of that. You respect people in order to gain respect.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
All right, so we go to the next one. You were harsh and crude, hard of heart. Were you harsh and crude, hard of heart, they would have fled from you. Here God is telling his prophet, peace be upon him, that despite your charisma, your concern for the believers, and all of your other positive characteristics, you were harsh and hard-hearted. Were you harsh and hard-hearted, your companions would have left you. Therefore, you must avoid those characteristics. This is a lesson for us in terms of how we should approach leadership and positions of authority.
Right. No, that establishes a pretty straightforward principle. You treat people with disrespect and so on, and you wouldn't keep them. It's pretty interesting that in today's world, particularly in terms of leadership, measuring leadership effectiveness, one of the things we look for is this whole issue of employee turnover within organizations. Is there a turnover issue? At what level? And further to that, well, is it as a result of a leadership issue or deficiency? Yep. I think I've been inspired by one individual, one of the local business owners, I think it's cosmetics, who said when he bought the business, there were 5 employees on staff. And I think 30, 40 years down the road, one employee migrated, the other 4 are still with him. Now, as a business owner myself, and having had different staff in different ventures and so on, that is something that I find fascinating, because here you are talking about somebody committing to being with you and building your business that you envision and that you started and so on for their lifetimes. 40 years is your working life. And I find that to be amazing. I don't know that I could replicate that success. I think it's too late already, yeah? On my part. But here you have one individual, surely that person must be doing something right. To inherit 5 people, keep 4 of them for their lives is a fantastic accomplishment by any measure. And on the other part, you have individuals. I mean, you see it. You see individuals. They always training staff, but you never have staff trained because the turnover is so high.
That's right.
It may be as a result of the industry, and the industry is given to high turnover and so on. In some cases, it's deliberate, but it also could be as a result of leadership deficiencies. In many instances, we
let
have
me just
found
finish
that
this part here.
it is the case.
Yeah. People who are harsh in their leadership, which we were talking about, leadership styles oftentimes demand respect. They should be mindful of the fact that respect that is demanded is seldom lasting, and it is never sincere. People who are gentle in the appropriate situation, compassionate, empathetic, and magnanimous command respect. Respect that is commanded is sincere and lasting. And it goes on further. Leaders who are fair and gentle attract talented individuals, while those who are harsh are usually intimidated and threatened by talented people, and generally repulse them. Their insecurity is sensed by talented people who are secure within themselves. This leads to them shying away from harsh individuals. This in turn leads to corrupt or incompetent inner circle developing around leaders who demand respect through harsh treatment and crude mannerisms. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, mentioned that when God desires good for a leader, he gives him good circle of advisors. The opposite is also true. How well put?
Absolutely correct. I think we subscribe to that fully in terms of the models of leadership that we espouse. Fair and gentle, I think, are the key elements. Probably don't see enough of it. I think they are both equally important. You have to have that compassion for people, or that empathy for people, and give them that respect. My approach, my personal approach, for example, is listen, I would start off with 100% respect to you, and you deduct from it as you choose. Yeah, you could be down to 70%, you could be down to 0. Right. That's entirely up to you. That's and right. I'm not going to preempt any of that. But yes, you have that, and at the end of the day, you see, it boils down to one issue. You're speaking to human beings, you're working with human beings, you're dealing with human beings, and you are a human being yourself. And I think some people forget that. Some people in leadership positions would tend to adopt the approach that they are superior, they are in charge, they reach, they're on top of everybody, looking down, and this kind of thing. And therefore they must be better in some way, shape, or form. And where you have a society, for example, that puts the leader on a pedestal, as I was alluding to before, you tend to have such a profound psychological impact. I mean, okay, look at the story of Malcolm X. Here you had, was it Elijah Muhammad, and as Malcolm X narrated, Elijah Muhammad could have done anything at all, and they would not have questioned it.
That's right.
Yeah. You had almost a blind loyalty, well, an absolute blind loyalty. Yeah. Anything could have been done, and I think that's one of the issues you have. I mean, could you imagine where you have blind loyalty? Anything you say would be accepted and embraced and viewed as so wise and so profound and so on. It must have an impact.
And you know, there's a possibility that Elijah Muhammad started off as a very genuine leader.
It's possible. Yeah.
But because of that kind of blind loyalty, he realized that he wielded more power than he really did have.
Correct.
Acted upon it.
Yeah, it's a mind job, you know.
Yeah.
And it takes, I would say, not having experienced it myself, but I would say that it would demand so much strength from an individual, so much humility, or that individual would have to constantly temper and keep themselves in check.
That's right.
And I think you have that built in the Islamic approach to this whole leadership issue. Time and again, you had the different leaders of the Muslim world saying the same thing. You have to keep me in check as it relates to Islamic laws and principles and responsibilities. And where I'm in error, correct me. And where I'm doing a good job, let's give thanks and praise to Almighty Allah and so on.
Yeah? And I think the current Muslims have to adopt that and understand we gotta just give a free rein to people in leadership.
I would agree with that entirely. I think
because we have abandoned our responsibility as individual Muslims to take part in the whole process
Correct.
Of the community development.
Correct. It's almost as if we commit to blind loyalty to our leaders.
Exactly.
And we're not willing to entertain any kind of criticism of our leaders. Some leaders themselves are like that.
That's right.
And where you have probably subordinates or people from outside giving a critical review, giving some what can be construed as negative feedback and so on, they would be ostracized. And in some organizations, for example, I've heard the term in working with some people, they're the flavor of the month or the flavor of the week, and well, they get put in the doghouse, and so on and so forth. Yeah, it alludes to that. It alludes to that whole sentiment of, well, are you telling me what I want to hear, or are you going to be critical and negative and so on? And I mean, thinking back on it, I'm probably as guilty as anyone else of some of those behaviors. Yeah.
Let's just take a little break. I didn't realize how much time went, and we didn't take our break, so we'll take a break now and get back to you in about a minute or so. Welcome back, brothers and sisters. We just have a short time again, and we will try to do one more area of this ayah from the Quran. Therefore, pardon their abuses. I see how it's simply broken down. We would be quick to pardon others where our rights are involved, or where the transgressions we observe arise from ignorance. One of the greatest lessons we enforce upon ourselves when we are quick to pardon is that perfection is God's alone. Recognizing that we do not expect perfection from ourselves, nor do we expect it from others, we do strive for perfection and constant improvement. However, we realize that perfection is simply not in our lot in life. When our parents, spouses, children, employees, co-workers, and others understand that they have room for error in their dealing with us, they are more relaxed and therefore less likely to err. This is a simple yet unappreciated truth. Also, we have to understand that when we are merciful and forgiving, we invite God's mercy and forgiveness into our life. God mentioned in the Quran, O believers, verily among your spouses and children are those that are enemies unto you. If you pardon them, overlook their faults, and seek forgiveness for them, then you should know that God is oft forgiving and most merciful. Yep. Surah 64, verse 16.
I'm actually glad that I'm hearing this, because this is something that I would struggle with myself. Yeah. Pardon the abuses. Nobody's perfect. So let's attempt to overlook the imperfections of others and ourselves. Pretty interesting. I don't know that I can in all situations. That's me personally.
Yeah.
Right. You see.
Well, you have a jihad.
Well, thank you very much for.
But you have to look at it in the context of, as I said, remember we are taking little parts of this thing. But really, as a leader, we have to look at the whole context.
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
He's trying to highlight different issues, and we spoke about the early one where it was be gentle,
right,
and just be pardoned.
Right.
And then we were being harsh. And then we realized that in that whole scenario, and we also know about the whole building of relationships, right, and coaching that is necessary as part of leadership and training. So we realize that we have to work all those things. In effect, what they are trying to tell us, but he did say, strive to be perfect.
In our own little way.
That's right.
Correct. And I agree with that. And I think that is something that you see a lot of people, particularly professionals, aspiring towards. This whole emphasis of continuous improvement it has a big following globally, yeah, in terms of management theory. You see, the problem is this. If you are wronged by somebody, if you are disrespected or embarrassed or treated with out of favor, treated with unjustly, and so on. What I understand Islam to advocate is forgive, yeah, and treat people with mercy and so on. I have found myself, for example, putting more emphasis on the inability to forget. And therefore, my personal take, for example, is, well, if you are capable of this, unless you demonstrate some radical change, you'd be capable of it again, and I would have to keep you at a distance, in order to mitigate any risk of going through that incident again. I think it really speaks to a very strong character. You're speaking, for example, of somebody who is so secure in their position as a leader, secure in their strengths and their competencies as an individual, that they'd be very willing to say, well, look, you made some errors, and that's perfectly fine. I think as a Muslim, it's a lot easier because of the fact that there is a day of judgment, and God is the judge, the absolute and only judge for that day, and we'll all be held accountable. And therefore, you could do me wrong, and I could overlook it and pray to God directly and say, listen, you have to help me through this because this individual is feeling. And I think that you would find one sentiment supporting the other in that regard. Knowing that God is the controlling force or the judge, and therefore he will exact retribution and so on as he sees fit.
In respect to that particular point that you're making there, and how difficult it is, I just want to go to one area here. This was an article written by Dr. Fazl Rahman Ansari.
Okay.
Tazkiyah and Islamic leadership. I just want to go through what he said here. The foundation of Islamic studies are basically ethno-religious. Hence, anyone who honestly comes forward to lead Muslims to the goal prescribed for them in the Holy Quran should possess a personality refulgent in its spiritual, moral, and intellectual dimensions. And just to clarify, refulgent means shining brilliantly. But that was his word.
Right.
Right? In its spiritual, moral, and intellectual dimension. This is the verdict of the Quran, and this is the verdict of Islamic history. But how can such a personality be built up? By mere emotionalism, by mere mysticism, by mere intellectualism, by mere ritualism, by mere formal puritanism, by mere externalism and legalism, by mere ritualistic missionaryism, by mere political agitationism. In the name of Islam, no, 1,000 times no. The only alchemy which can transform the human personality into pure gold is the alchemy of rigorous discipline of tazkiyah, with its rigorous enhanced in the measure of the height of achievement desired. This is what has been taught and demonstrated by the Holy Prophet, in whom God abides choicest blessings. And this is what has been practiced throughout Islamic history by those who had truly grasped the dynamics of leadership in Islam and were consequently able to achieve historic success. What is tazkiyah? Tazkiyah means to follow Islam in every aspect of one's life, and in particular to subdue the vile inner qualities that are present within us, such as envy, jealousy, greed, ignorance, impatience, etc., and develop in their place beautiful inner qualities such as gratitude, sincerity, humility, patience, and the like.
Good. And I'm really glad that he took the pains to explain what he was saying initially. The amount of isms that I heard, I was thinking I probably wouldn't be reading that book in a hurry. But yeah, you see, it's a package deal.
That's right, and that's the point we get at.
Correct. You can't be a good leader at your organization and come home and be a brute, and vice versa.
Or you can't reach a good leadership position if you have one characteristic.
Correct.
It has to be a combination.
That's right. And you see, it's all tempered by this belief in a deity who is all-encompassing, all-wise, and so on. And therefore, there's nothing that we could do and nowhere that we could go that we could escape his knowing what we're about, which to me is a really good check valve, if you will, for individuals in a leadership position, individuals aspiring to a leadership position, because we keep that in the back of our minds. You see that, listen, this is not just about what form I take in this capacity or in this position, but it has to be something that is inculcated in our entire approach.
The other end of that is that the persons who are being led has a similar responsibility to gain knowledge and understanding of these matters.
Absolutely correct, because the only person who could, the only way that we could be tempered in our behaviors and our actions currently is, number one, a divine act, some affliction or punishment or something, or the people themselves put us in check.
That's right.
And it's pretty stark in Islam and the history of Islamic civilization, where you had such a great emphasis time and time again, repeatedly. Listen, the laws are revealed and they are absolute and they are not subject to change, and therefore follow me as long as I lead you down that path. And if I don't, if I falter, if I transgress, then correct me or replace me or whatever. You understand? That was the sentiment. And again, it speaks to, in part, the role of the leader being marginalized in Islam, or it needs to be marginalized almost in Islam. You have an administrator, you have a theological guide, but you have individual faith and individual adherence to these laws, assessed on the basis of intention.
That's right.
Yeah, and it's a pretty powerful combination of dynamics or impacting factors that set the tone for the Muslim community as we see it today globally.
Well, for everybody actually. So
Okay.
I hope you would adopt some of these into your management and consultancy practice and start spreading it out. So my brothers, we come to the end of another program. We have not been able to deal with this particular issue in the short time that we had. So next program we will continue dealing with it and go through the whole ayah that we had started to deal with. So once again, thank you, and join us next Tuesday, same time, for another interesting, different perspective. Assalamu alaikum.